Moments ago, President Trump wrapped up a news conference with NATO Secretary General at the White House addressing the crisis in Syria and stepping up pressure on Russia to abandon its support for Bashar al-Assad. Just hours before, his Secretary of State Rex Tillerson met face-to-face with Vladimir Putin in Moscow. More on that in a moment. But the UN Security Council today also tried to condemn Syria's attack on its own people today, but the vote failed because one permanent member on the council vetoed the resolution. Remember, it takes only one permanent member to veto the vote. So who vetoed the effort to sanction Assad? It was Russia. President Trump stood by his decision to strike Syria last week after Assad gassed his own people.
When you get into the gases, especially that form, it's vicious and violent, and everybody in this room saw it all too many times over the last 3 or 4 days. Young children dying, babies dying, fathers holding children in their arms that were dead children. There can't be a worse sight, and it shouldn't be allowed. That's a butcher. That's a butcher. So I felt we had to do something about it. I have absolutely no doubt we did the right thing.
President Trump also addressed the escalating tensions with Moscow.
Right now, we're not getting along with Russia at all. We may be at an all-time low in terms of relationship with Russia. This is built for a long period of time. But we're going to see what happens. I'll also see about Putin over a period of time. It'd be a fantastic thing if we got along with Putin and if we got along with Russia. And that could happen, and it may not happen. It may be just the opposite. I would love to be able to get along with everybody. Right now, the world is a mess. But I think by the time we finish, I think it's going to be a lot better place to live in.
All right, KG, a lot coming out, a lot of foreign policy coming out of that NATO address or little press conference there. He called Assad a butcher. That's the president, and also said that we're at an all-time low in relations with Russia.
Well, again, he's being very transparent and plain speaking, and I think the American people prefer to hear the truth and sort of be a part of what's going on, especially in that geopolitical area. This is something that's been the subject of much dialogue and theorizing over an extended period of time, including during the Obama administration, and now he's calling it like he sees it. He says that Assad is a butcher. He's right. That this guy is an animal. He's right. And he's also seeing very clearly that it is a complicated relationship with Russia that we have, that it's not even that easy to try to just get along with people, even if you have some common interest, because there's so many different things going on in the world. You know, with Ukraine, we've got a complicated mess there. In the Middle East, in Syria, Russia's relationship with Iran. So how does the United States fit into that, puzzle piece in terms of trying to create cooperative partnerships with people that in many instances are playing for the wrong team and playing with our adverse enemies?
Greg, what signal or symbolism is it that Russia, one of the 5 Permanent Security Council members, vetoed a sanction for Assad? Now, what message are they sending?
That they will never change. Like we keep talking about trying to normalize with Russia. This is normal relations with Russia. The one thing that this is why the strike in Syria was a good thing, because it really was first-rung material. It's the minimum wage of responses. We hit only one facility, so there's all this room to move up. And so that we can now, like this actually, we may have to do it again, but the next step may be 2 facilities or more of Assad's military. But there's enough room so that we can keep actually responding without it turning into something ugly and testing Putin instead of Putin testing the reverse. And I agree with Kimberly. The best thing and the most refreshing thing that you see out of both Trump and Rex, or as I call them together, T-Rex, the bluntness of the language is refreshing. It's just kind of nice that you kind of hear this stuff. It doesn't sound academic. We went through 8 years of academic language that we walked away going like, what just happened? Here, you know what's happening because they're telling you.
Dana, there was another little innuendo in that UN vote, in the Security Council vote. So Russians said no, they vetoed the sanctioning, but China, interestingly, abstained from the vote, meaning they didn't vote no. I mean, they have a whole situation going on between them and North Korea right now going on. So maybe they condone some sort of action by the U.S. Is that Is that fair?
Well, I think I think that the meeting that President Trump had last week with the president of China was probably more productive than, like, there were concrete things that they could say, but by the president's readout, that when he told the president of China that, look, I just want to let you know over this chocolate cake that we just did this, and the Chinaman said,
fantastic chocolate cake,
amazing, beautiful, and apparently the Chinese president said, I understand why you did it. Well, that doesn't mean that he's condoning it. He's like, he understands, and I think an abstention is actually pretty good progress from that standpoint. I also think that the power of journalism cannot be underestimated. What President Trump was talking about there in the beginning of the sound bites were all of the pictures that moved him so much. The only way that you actually know what's going on the ground is if you have journalists who are brave enough to go and get that information. That is not fake news. It is absolutely real, and we really owe them a debt of gratitude for being willing to be there and cover that story. For as heartbreaking as it is, we need to see those pictures.
Juan, do you want to grade the president and the administration on a pretty heavy foreign policy day today?
Well, I thought the most newsy thing that came out of it was when the president said, we're not going into Syria. I mean, he made it very clear. So, to me, this was an important step because I think he has to maintain political support here at home. Republicans have supported him in terms of the airstrike, but the question is, what about going forward? And the polls indicate most people don't. And when it comes to the crying children, the question, I think, in terms of a rationale for this military action is, well, what about the fact that you have continued attacks in Syria with conventional weapons? In fact, flying off of the same airstrip that we bombed. I mean, what a thumb in the eye that is to President Trump. So, I mean, the question is, what are you going to do now? And what about hotspots elsewhere in the world? And what about the fact that those children, when they're fleeing, are treated, with some degree of contempt in terms of our refugee policy?
Incomplete? Not A or B or C? Incomplete?
He's abstaining like
No, I don't abstain. I want a policy. In other words, I'd like to know what's the Trump doctrine with regard to Syria. Remember, he said to President Obama, don't do it, don't do it. So now he's president, he's done it, and there are lots of people, including Democrats, from Pelosi to Hillary Clinton, who say it was the right thing to do. But people want to know where we go from here. What's the meaning? That's why I say it's such important news that he said today, we, the United States, not going into Syria.
All right, let's talk about this. Rex Tillerson met with Russian President Vladimir Putin as tensions rise between the two countries. They apparently met for 2 hours or so, along with Tillerson's Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov. One thing was made clear, again, as President Trump said as well, relations with Russia are at an all-time low.
I expressed the view that the current state of U.S.-Russia relations is at a low point. There is a low level of trust between our two countries. The world's two foremost nuclear powers cannot have this kind of relationship. Over the course of the past 2 years, a number of reciprocal actions have been taken to demonstrate the dissatisfaction each country has with the other. We need to attempt to put an end to this steady degradation, which is doing nothing to restore the trust between our two countries or to make progress on the issues of the greatest importance to both of us.
So, Greg, after a 2-hour meeting with Putin, he comes out and says we're at an all-time low in relations.
But, first of all, you got to compare briefing rooms. Like, how grim is that room compared to ours? I mean, it reminds you of a cross between, a DMV and a military panel that's judging parades. It's just so sad. There's not even water there for anybody. It's really bad.
Vodka.
But I have to say, Tillerson, this is not Tillerson's first plate of caviar. This is not a date arranged by Match.com. He's been through this. His face is stonier than Brezhnev. He's out-Russianing the Russians. I'm a 52-year-old man, and I'm convinced that Tillerson could still send me to my room without dinner. That voice, I don't think, what was the guy's name? Lavrov is sitting there going through the history of what's happened before. He's basically saying, America, don't do anything. You'll just make things worse while they make it worse. He didn't even listen. I don't even think he took it seriously. Tillerson just went straight ahead, and I think he had the right tone and the right seriousness in that grim room.
Dana, Chris Wallace described Lavrov as being very firm, very stern, and maybe out press conference.
Well, he said he was very aggressive, but I think that's just a tactic for Lavrov. What I liked about what Tillerson did is he said there's this low level of trust. not on camera, but he said that the reason he needed to go was we needed to at least define the areas of disagreement. To me, that's how a CEO of a major company would approach a problem, which is to say, okay, let's figure out what are the issues that we actually have on the table and figure out what they are so that at least if we can agree with the Russians, these are our areas of disagreement, then there's at least a baseline to go from. So I also know that he during his confirmation hearings, he was praised for being somebody who can bring people together and try to negotiate and not a deal maker, but one of the examples was the Boy Scouts in that big controversy that they had a few years ago. He was the chairman of the board. That was a pro bono work that he did, and he was able to keep all of that together. And people involved in that said that they've never seen anybody so good at figuring out what the problem was and then figuring out a way to bring it to resolution in a very calm way, like Greg was saying.
Juan, can you give President Trump credit for picking what appears to be the right guy for Secretary of State?
Wow, I can't. I mean,
not even that.
You knew the answer to that.
No,
well, ditching the press pool was not a good idea.
I think the whole relationship that he's had with the press has been very difficult. It's been fraught. He does not communicate well. Nobody knows what's going on, or the people at the State Department feel like they're being held at arm's length. And, of course, that's difficult. So that means he's not doing a good job of running the department.
But Juan, can I ask you, I would rather have him have a strong relationship with our adversaries. I'd worry less about a relationship with the press, right? I mean, isn't one more important than the other?
I think that's all part of the deal. If you're Secretary of State, you are a public figure. And part of it is selling American foreign policy, not only here at home, but importantly overseas. So I think if you're asking about today, I think everybody says, good, stand up to Lavrov, stand up to Putin, right? And at home, President Trump said they're the ones that have been backing that monster in Syria, and they're making a mistake. So I imagine he's conveying the president's message. And I agree with that message. I feel it in my heart, so I'm all for it. I just want to know what they're doing, and it seems to me like Tillerson is unfamiliar with this territory.
Do they need to even tell us? Why don't you know what? I agree with Greg. I'd rather have them fix it and tell us
Sure. But
later
I think they're getting
both.
I think they are telling us. I think there is a transparency, and they're being open. And listen, I'm not disappointed if, Tillerson's not going to give me, like, flowery rhetoric to sing me to sleep at night. No problem. I'd rather have steely determination and focus and an understanding of the issues. He can work on his, State Department people skills later, get it done. He went in there, and he took it straight to Putin, and he brought up Assad, and he talked about this is a man who will be eventually prosecuted for war crimes, that the reign of the Assad family is coming to an end. Full stop. He brought up the Ukraine as well. So I have zero problem with that. That's a man who knows the opponent across the table, knows what they're capable of, and is willing to meet it head on. And he didn't pull back at all. And that's why the relationship right now with Russia and the United States, as referenced by the President of the United States, is at an all-time low, because we got in their face. It's enough already.
But you know what the best part about it is? Could you imagine Tillerson ever bringing James Taylor along?
No.
Right.
I mean, that's what we're talking about. What a change.
How about this? Can you imagine Putin and Rex Tillerson staring each other down?
Yeah.
Wow, that's an icy room.
Yeah.
And by the way, Sergei Lavrov earlier, prior to that press conference, said that the U.S. action in Syria was, they called it illegal.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
Putin would need to stand on a box.
So would I.
Well, and they still want to blame, quote,
with that?
extremists. They're still hiding behind this, phony story that, oh, well, maybe it was someone else, and poor Assad, because he's so innocent, was being framed.